In this video, we're going to do some sound resynthesis with a phenomenal tool called Myth. If you haven't already seen it, check out my prior video on Myth's little brother called ZYKLOP. But we are here to play with the big brother. So let's get into it. One of the big things that differentiates Myth from ZYKLOP is the fact that you have two eyes instead of just one. Each of those eyes being one of these irises, of course, representing one sound generator, one oscillator, if you will. But it's far more than just that, obviously. So let's look at the instance that I have here on the right side of the screen. And as you can tell by our little clue, by the name of the patch that I've created, we're dealing with phase distortion created in Surge. And conveniently enough, I happen to have Surge running right here above it on the screen with the phase distortion engine ready to roll. Now, I wanted to show you this because Surge is so powerful itself. It is an indispensable tool for sound design. It doesn't do resynthesis, but we're going to use it as the source of the sound that we will be resynthesizing, using the phase distortion engine, as I mentioned. Now, the phase distortion engine is remarkably deceptive in its simplicity. We have but these 4 controllers here, and in the case of this sound, here we can see, by the way, above we have the waveform display. That's a very characteristic looking waveform that you would see on the CZ101, which I used many of in my studio when I was creating Hyperspace, ZULU MATRIX, back in 1993-94, which I just finished recreating for this phenomenal, just for me, phenomenal event of it being re-released on vinyl for all of the avid collectors out there. And to all of you, I say thank you for your appreciation and love of that song and that record that I made so long ago. But let's get back into it. I was using Surge in the reconstruction to redo those phase distortion sounds, those classic CZ101 sounds. And so that waveform looks very familiar in that regard. Let's play a note and hold it. Hear how it goes through that typical phase distortion type sound, that sweep. So what I did is I just recorded a few seconds of that, and now we're going to take the resulting wave file and we're going to load it into Myth. I've already got one of those loaded here into the left iris. And that one, I am using what Peter refers to as classic resynthesis algorithm, similar to what you would have had quite a while ago if you were unbelievably wealthy back in the day, to have something like a synclavier or a Fairlight CMI to be able to do their rudimentary resynthesis back in the day that would have cost you about the same as a house. So let's hear how that sounds. It doesn't really sound all that much like the original, does it? It kind of resembles it in a way. But let's now load that same source into the other iris using the modern V2 resynthesis algorithm. By the way, one of the great things that differentiates Myth from ZYKLOP is the fact that there's a third option here, and that is to actually be able to process stereo sources. But we're going to do mono, and let's select that file, the CZ from Surge. And it processed it so quickly that we didn't even get a prompt. But let me just move our little half moon, if you will, that's currently pointing at iris number 1, the classic, and let's move it over to point to the new one. And here it is, the one that we just did now. Now, you see these sort of pulsing things that are happening here? That's because I'm doing modulation to the iris itself, this parameter right here. And if I click on it, we can see that now it has been selected. And here in this column, we see everything to do with modulation. And see how LFO2, the one that is moving, has some selection here. And what I've done is just simply rotating the control with the mouse to adjust how much it's being affected. And here it's actually in the negative domain, and here in the positive domain, and by how much. That's complete. And as you can see, it's very much animated now because I have it so strongly selected. In fact, let's play a note and hear what happens with all of this modulation going on of the iris. See how the sound changed so much when that piece faded away. Where you see that arm that's moving around, that's what we're hearing right now as it's sweeping around through the resulting resynthesis. So, let's hear them both at the same time. Now, the one on the left isn't really contributing all that much because it's just not as exciting as the one on the right. So let's update the one on the left to the version 2 of the resynthesis algorithm using the same wave. And there we go. Now we have it on both. And if you look closely, you'll note that the one on the left, the edges are not as jagged as they are on the iris on the right. And that's because of what I'm doing here to it with the synthesis. And we won't get into that in this video. You're going to have to play with it yourself. But let's just listen now to the change from updating it to the new resynthesis engine. That's added a lot of texture to it. And let's move in its direction. Nice and mysterious. Let's get some more notes involved at different velocities. Listen to a very low velocity. Now the very same note at a high velocity. There's a lot of mystery going on in this sound. And a lot of movement, a lot of ambience. I hope you're listening in stereo. Now let's compare that again to the original source on Surge. Isn't that funny? Honey? Oh my. It's just beautiful. Let's go back to Myth again. Same note. Let's add some more notes again. Wow. What do you think of that? Okay, let's now go to the instance here on the left with the subtle clue in its file name of ZULU MATRIX flute. For this one, we're going to use a different source. It's a brand new sound design tool that is still in development. In fact, it's very rudimentary because it is so early in development. It's on GitHub and it's being created as we speak. It's called Rippler X. And what this is a tool that deals with, it's like a reconstruction of the source, the physical source of a sound. So they call it physical modeling. And over the years and decades, there have been very many rudimentary, it's almost the equivalent of what I was just saying earlier about resynthesis and how it has evolved so much. In fact, so recently, I have to really take my hat off to Peter at Dawson. Myth and ZYKLOP, they are just otherworldly. These are game changers when it comes to resynthesis. And a similar sort of thing is happening right now with Rippler X in terms of physical modeling. Listen to this, and again, this tool, I can't overstate how rudimentary this tool is right now. It has no modulation capabilities. In fact, many of the components can't even be controlled in terms of their volume, their level, in relation to the others. And so it's very crude. But listen to this pan flute. Listen to the chiff. Listen to how you can hear the resonance of the tube. That's really good. Wow. And I made that sound in about 30 seconds. Well, as you can see, there aren't really a lot of parameters here, but still. So I made a nice little recording of that as well. And here we have it loaded into Myth. Just to show you again, I'm going to, even though it's already loaded, I will reload it. And we'll do the same thing. Resynthesis version 2 mono. And here we have pan flute Rippler X. And there it is. So let's take a listen to this. Now we're going to hear, as you can see, I have it on both irises. I have iris 2 turned off right now. So this is just iris 1, which is the more creative of the two. So once again, just for a second, we're going to hear the original Rippler X, and then I'm going to switch to the Myth version. Now, I'm doing some pretty wild synthesis to that right there to make it sound so different. Let's turn on iris 2, and actually, we'll leave iris 1 on, but I'm going to turn the moon to face iris 2 completely. So we will only hear it, but then I'm going to blend in iris 1. Go to the same octave. This is transposed, so I grabbed the same note, but it was the wrong octave. So I've added a little bit of creativity to it, but you can tell that it still resembles the original. Let's switch back to Rippler for a moment. Oh, wrong octave again, sorry. And now we'll switch octaves and switch channels. So we've added a little goodness to that. And now let's bring in the other iris. And I'm doing the same trick with the velocity on this, so let's listen to it at a very low velocity. let's add a little bit of expressiveness. What can I say? That's added an awful lot to that, wouldn't you say? And this is just really basic stuff that I'm doing here. I don't have the time or, to be quite blunt, the desire to go into much detail in these videos. I just wanted to show you really how powerful Myth is. And we've only scratched the surface here. Not even. There's so much that you can do. In fact, I'm using Myth now on the reissue of Hyperspace. As luck would have it, as fate would intervene, Myth came into my life just in the nick of time, if you will, before the actual pressing of the new vinyl for Hyperspace. We are waiting for a very special remix that's being done by a contemporary artist for the flip side of the record. So you're going to have a very different version of Hyperspace on the other side. That's the only hint I'm going to give you for now. Stay tuned for upcoming news about Hyperspace. But what I wanted to say is, because of the wait for the production of the remix of the reissue, I decided to take advantage of this little opportunity to do some innovation using Myth for Hyperspace, for my reissue of the original version. And that's with the sample that I created of myself smashing an anvil, which I did in the original and I recreated for the new version, the reissue, the new version of the old version that sounds almost the same, except so much nicer because it's so new. Well, I added to that anvil by having two completely different renditions of smashing the anvil and loading them both into Myth, one for each iris, and then doing some of this amazing synthesis, resynthesis, and modulation to it, where I was able to, I'm not sure if I showed you this, I don't think I did, where you could take, for example, let's use, why not? Let's use the flute. And let's go with iris number 2, which is the one that's more faithful to the original. And now what we're going to look at is how we can play around with the components of the resynthesis of the sound. It's not very colorful like the phase distortion one here, but that's because of how much was going on in that sound that was analyzed and resynthesized. Whereas the pan flute is a lot simpler, but you can still see that there are different colors and different layers there. And this parameter right here that I just clicked on to show is the actual components, the layers, if you will, of the sound at different frequencies and at different moments in time. Because when we play that sound, then we see that line that's sweeping around, that arm that's sweeping like the arm of an analog clock. And so at those moments, the sound is being processed in the way that you see the arm is where it's touching the representation at that moment. So now while it's playing through that cycle, I'm going to just manually change this parameter that's going to change what you see and what we hear as we go through the different components, the different layers of the reconstruction. So here we're hearing only the bottom layer. And now let's go all the way through to the top. And back to the middle. If I grab the control. So by double clicking on it, that takes us right back to the middle. But now we can modulate this. See how all of the LFOs are busy doing their various things that I've created? Number 4 looks like it's moving around in an interesting way. Let's add some. Let's make it more extreme. There's so much high frequency content in the sound that you can't really hear it very much until it's at the extremes. At the low end. There we go. Let's try the same trick with the phase distortion sound because we have a lot more complexity to what we're hearing here. So we're looking mainly at iris 1. So let's play it. And let's do the very same thing. Select that parameter. And then grab one of these LFOs. Look at 6, it's just going all the way up and down. That's perfect. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Let's just dial that back a little bit so it's not all the way. That's good. Now, let's bring in some of the other iris. And because this is much softer, let's turn it up a bit. So that was just playing with one parameter, which is the layers of the reconstruction. And I did that to the anvil in Hyperspace, which made each and every strike of the anvil completely unique. And yet, because I was doing that as one layer and the other layer left intact, it was changing the character of the sound, but not making it so different that it would throw you off. And it just adds so much beauty to it. Oh, it's overwhelming to me. When I hear it, well, when I heard it, when I did it, it was like, okay, this is finished now. That was the cherry on top. Anyways, I went on much too long, but I wanted to share my enthusiasm with you for this phenomenal tool. And one last thing to say, and that is that Myth is available as a time-limited demo. You just have to make sure that your studio computer is connected to the internet. Mine is not, so I wasn't able to do that. But as you can see, we've got Myth in the studio now, and it's here to stay. Wow, I love this thing. Okay, have fun.